Welcome to Bereans at the Gate. This is our video blog for October 22nd, 2018. Gentlemen, an interesting article today in the Wall Street Journal. Jeff, do you want to give us sort of an overview of the article and what the basic point of it is, and let's discuss it.
Well, Gerald Seib the title of this article says, "Battle for the GOP's Soul, Trump Has Won." And it walks through some of the changes within the party to show that people that have heretofore been maybe critics of him, including Never Trumpers, are now kind of drifting towards that. It's talking about some of the party positions, which we've noted and discussed, things like normally being in favor of a globalization approach being gone, being against trade being gone. People that formerly embraced free trade, for instance, are now kind of joining the Trump kind of party platform line. And so is there anything left of the old Republican Party? That's kind of his point. Look, Mr. Trump has won. People are falling in line with his platform. And so this populist approach is now the Republican Party. And so that's kind of the line that he goes over, and it's a fairly compelling case.
Bert, do you buy it? Let's start there. Do you think this is an accurate description?
I do. I think it's been happening slowly but surely since Trump became president, and I really felt ostracized even before Trump was elected. So as a free trader, as a classical liberal, I felt like there was no place for me, and I'm feeling that now, and I don't think there's going to be any spot for someone of my ilk in the future. Unless I change. And,
pretty strong words.
Well,
unless you change?
Certainly.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not going to, so, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Mark, what do you think?
Well, let me just turn it a little bit. I do think there's been some change regarding trade, for example, but how much of the Republican agenda, how much in proportion to the total agenda we see, has been changed? That's my question, too. I think there's a lot of stuff that would be consistent with Trump from the Republicans still. Yeah. So it's not a total change.
But what's the Republican agenda? I mean,
well,
honestly, what is the agenda?
Granted, we're not sure as much as we used to be.
Yeah.
I grant that. But there are certain things that you see
recognize
as Republican, right? Yeah. Conservative.
No, let me interrupt. I'm sorry, because I disagree with that point. Where is the Republican agenda? I mean, I don't. You can interrupt me in just a second. I will cede back. Can I have the floor from the gentleman from the Department of History and Government?
No filibustering.
Okay. So I think that clearly the agenda is one of strong economic growth, and the agenda is one.
But how? Go ahead.
That's a legitimate point. That's where we need to get to. Because we all agree that Mr. Trump's policies are a mixed bag with respect to the linkage to that. But nevertheless, he believes that all those policies would lead to a destination that we all would want to go to. Likewise, he believes in a strong foreign policy agenda, more American related in terms of economic interests. But I don't find, for instance, anything wrong with his trying to push NATO partners to pay more of their bills. Yeah. I don't think that that's anything unusual. His bluntness of approach to it is quite distinctive. But the underlying goals of much of his agenda are not. I agree with you. It's not a lot different. So I think there is an agenda, but it's just we don't like.
You mentioned goals, but you haven't mentioned an agenda.
Well, I mean, okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, what I'm talking about is no one is going to be for poor economic growth. They're not going to come out and say
that's how you achieve it.
It's how you go about it. And what the Republicans said for years during my lifetime is that this comes through, through individual freedom, free trade.
Yes.
And Trump has taken that and just completely changed it and altered it.
I know that.
And he may be pulling back regulation in a very good way, and I think that would have been consistent with Republican thinking over the years. But I just can't, again, to me, he's taken what was a Republican and made it something totally different. He's made it the Republic of Trump, the party of Trump.
On that, yes, on that economic issue of free trade versus tariffs and so forth, that's true. That's not the typical conservative Republican agenda from years ago. But what about the rest of it, though? Isn't the rest of it sort of consistent with conservative values or Republican values?
Like reduce spending, entitlement reform.
Right, I'm not saying that part. I'm talking about foreign policy.
Even foreign policy is really different.
Bureaucracy.
How so? Go with
administrative regulation.
Go with
that kind of thing.
Traditionally, Republicans have really worked hard to try to build those bridges with other countries. We tend to be a little bit more interventionistic in some ways, tend to be a little bit more connected to our allies, historically especially, a little bit more realistic in some ways, with a little bit of idealism sprinkled in there. Trump has blown a lot of that up to some extent. But pushing it further, I mean, telling Canada that we're going to have to rethink all of our connections because of maple syrup, But on the other hand, telling the Saudis, hey, whatever's going on in your embassy, we can kind of look the other way. We've got this arms deal going.
That won't last.
He's done very little to speak up for traditional Republican political values in terms of foreign policy.
I think that would be the case, and I think all of us would agree in terms of him speaking up for any of these traditional things. But the question is, what are his actions, or better yet, his administration's actions? So, for instance, on foreign policy, let's just step down some of these kind of issues. He has been quite strong on China with respect to foreign policy issues. He's pushing, and we're going to have more Navy sailors going through the disputed Taiwan Straits real quick. And so he's been quite aggressive on that in defending American interests, and that's consistent with presidents Democratic and Republican. Mr. Obama did the same thing. Mr. Clinton, I remember when he sent the aircraft carrier there. So I think that's been consistent with what Republicans have done all along. I think what he's done in many respects, even in the Middle East to some degree, but certainly in Europe, has been strong in action, even on the Russians. His personal talk against the Russians is not correct, but his administration's approach to Russia has actually been regular, kind of normal Republicanism.
Right.
Then we're kind of assuming that he's responsible for that?
Well, that's what we can't be sure of.
Yeah, right.
We can't be sure of, all right?
Now, I will say
he gets the blame and the credit for his administration.
That's fair.
Because
He
he picked
does,
leaders.
but here's one of my fears with what we're talking about. I agree with what you're saying, but I think that would be the Republicans that were already there. I mean, and if Trump continues to get more and more powerful, his perspective may more and more change what the Republicans have done. So if you can talk about foreign policy, then what may have been accomplished, may have been just simply because of residual humans, or people, maybe not residual, but individuals in the administration that Trump appointed that don't think like he did. The longer we go with him and the more the Republican Party becomes like Trump, the higher the probability that he'll mess something up with foreign policy. So that's what I'm saying.
It's a good point. I would say in foreign policy, speaking is as important as actions. It's a little different than domestic policy. He can construct an agenda in domestic policy. Foreign policy is a little bit more complicated. His rhetoric matters, I would say, at least as much in foreign policy as it does in domestic policy. And his rhetoric has really been pretty shabby in terms of foreign policy.
But to what extent do you think that his rhetoric has already been discounted, such that that is less effective than it used to be?
It's possible.
I mean,
people don't
for
take
instance,
him seriously.
nobody takes anything that the Rocket Man says, right? The North Korean dictator, because he's going to say crazy things all the time. And so I would think it's probably the rest of the world may look at, hey, that's just Trump talking. And
to an extent.
You could be right. But my question would be, is that good for the country?
I don't think it's good.
No,
I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's not.
You're probably right.
That's what we don't know. Will it hurt? Right.
Yeah.
It might not. It might not do any good, but at least we hope it doesn't hurt.
What about domestically? Anybody care to push back on the domestic
Administrative
issues?
regulations are being reduced. Bureaucracy itself in numbers is being reduced. That's a good thing. That's always a good thing. We have a Supreme Court nominee now. We have two. And that's a good thing.
A lot of lower tier judges.
And a lot of lower tier judges, circuit and district court judges.
Very good on that.
These are good. These are all good things. These are good for domestic policy. And I see more of that kind of thing coming from him.
But a lot of those choices or a lot of those things really are no different than any other Republican would have done. Is that right? Would you say? So in that sense, it's not all that
We hope.
Well, I make the point
different. But I think a typical Republican might have gone farther. I guess that's part of my.
No,
Would he?
let me
But
push
that's the
back on
question.
another direction.
What
I
did
think
Bush
you're
do?
right in some cases. In other cases, his personality, I think that other Republicans would have bailed on Kavanaugh with the pressure that they had.
There's
And he stuck with
possibility.
it.
There's a
Yes.
possibility of that.
That's
I don't
possible.
disagree with that.
And what did Bush do the last 2 years of his administration? He just.
But this is the first 2 years, right?
I know.
These are his
Yeah.
golden years, and he's,
Yeah.
granted, he's cut taxes, he's got judicial
He wants another
appointments,
one.
but think about
Yeah,
everything else
tax
he
cut.
could have done, but he's just not, because he
Well,
can't. But I don't really
there
know
are
what he
things
wants
he
to
can't
do.
do.
I
Yes,
guess-
there are things
What
he
do you
can't
think
do.
he should have done that he didn't get done?
Yeah.
I mean, and
Let's say
spending and entitlement reform are the big ones for me.
I think
Those are massive.
Those are dead
And
on arrival.
He has no interest in doing any of it. And the
all
party,
agree.
as a result, has said, okay, we're done with it.
I think the party has said already, and he's just going along with them too.
That's fair. It's fair. It's not like George W. Bush was a deficit warrior
Right.
or anything like that. That's fair. It's a
We've
fair
given
point.
up. Everybody's given up on spending reductions and spending caps and just restraining.
I don't
Well,
think we
well,
were
no.
ever in the ball game. I don't think anyone ever really cared. I think that was simple rhetoric
not since-
over the cover. Right.
Since
Not
1967
really.
anyway.
That's a long time ago.
Well, let's talk about going forward. Let's assume that the GOP continues in this strain of Donald Trumpism for the next 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, whatever. What does this mean for the future of the country? I mean, Bert, what do you What would you see moving forward if this is exactly what we end up with?
Well, I do agree with Jeff in that his rhetoric, I think, doesn't matter much anymore. At least with me personally, I have finally learned to ignore what he's saying, and not. It's just so far out ahead of what actually happens. I don't think economically. I think we're looking at probably more good. That's what I think.
Yeah.
So, with me in foreign policy, I really don't know enough to say, other than I have been pleased that nothing horrendous has happened yet.
Nuclear war yet.
And again, that's just part of his rhetoric again, not actually being played out.
Right.
Actually in the field of battle. So again, I have not been disappointed with the track of the country at all since Donald Trump has been president. Again, I still don't feel like I'm ever going to be on board with him politically, but when I look at what has happened in the country, I'm happy with that, and I don't see any reason for change.
All right. Mark, what do you think moving forward?
If I were, I sort of agree with Bert, because there are aspects of Trump that his policies, that ideas, I just think are just silly, crazy. All right. Overall, domestically, I think he's done a pretty good job. I'll reserve judgment on the future of his foreign policy. It certainly is interesting. I'll give it that. It's not boring. If we stay out of war, I'll be happy. That would be a good thing for a change. But actually, I don't see bad things happening, unless you consider that there'll be something down the road economically that wasn't on the radar for anybody.
Let me follow up with that. One potential problem I do see, if we continue to move towards a more protectionist position, I do think that one of the primary roles of a more free global trading economy is better international relations.
Yeah.
And if we don't trade with people, and if we have those kind of animosities, I think it may lead to other kinds of animosities that might break out into armed conflict, or at least enhances the possibility of it. I don't see it happening, but I do think that is not outside the lines of possibility.
If he can restrict his desire to impose tariffs on people, to those people he doesn't like, then that'll at least keep it within some relatively narrow boundaries, not just blanket tariffs on everything all the time.
More intelligent tariffs would not hurt if you have to have tariffs.
Right, and I don't like them either, but if you're going to have them, at least
I
just bring
think
them.
that the level of tariffs, and I'm dead set against them, but I'm not as worried because I think he's done most of what he's going to do. We've already kind of got the new NAFTA kind, and that's our biggest trading partners, or within our North American partners. And so to the extent we kind of nail that down, and it's not that harmful, not that bad. Probably the only wild card vis-a-vis trade is what he's currently doing with China, and this is where I think your comment about potential foreign policy conflicts is at risk. So my real fear as an economist right now, one of the outstanding wild cards economically, is China has blown up the world's biggest bubble par excellence, and it's possible to burst. There's signs even right now. They're having protests in the street because of apartment complex prices that they bought are going down. Right. There's empty cities, all this stuff. If this bursts, and they have their meltdown, and we don't know how that unfolds in a totalitarian regime. But here's what we do know historically: when totalitarian regimes have domestic problems, they look for an outsider to be against. Right now, with the U.S. being against them, that gives us to be a target. We got the Taiwan Straits kind of things going on. There's the potential for conflict. Now, it would also be there in any case, because they would still do something. They would probably pick on Japan in the event of a conflict, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you could avoid that, but that kind of concerns me a little bit.
That's a concern, yeah.
What about the morality issues? I mean, do we have a party for family values anymore? We're moving forward with the Trumpification of the GOP. We have a president who's fairly well acknowledged now. He's paid off porn stars. He's in all sorts of things. Where does that leave us as believers in connection to a party that doesn't appear to be all that interested in those kinds of issues, at least at that level? Now, you could argue Supreme Court appointments and other things have an effect, but it changes our dynamic, I think.
I think that what we have to hope for as Christians is that we can have somebody come forward as stand by. I suggested a while back, we're not going to have anybody go against Trump prior to this election. If they lose the House, there will be some finger point, and there will be somebody that then might arise, even if they don't expect to defeat because of all the pressures of Trumpism, that they could be a standard bearer post-Trump. Somebody's going to want to fill the void after Trump, and they're going to try. They would probably want to start that to be the lead agent now. So one of their strategies might be, for instance, you probably recall, when JFK ran against Mr. Eisenhower, he did not really denigrate him. He just says, we can do better than this.
That's what
So
he
I
said.
think that the whoever the Republican challenger on the right is, and I would hope that we've talked about somebody like Ben Sass, they don't need to denigrate Mr. Trump specifically. They just say, we can do better
We can
than
do
this.
better.
We can. They don't
Well,
have
they'd
to
have to
denigrate
say.
his followers. If they can do that without going against the policies that have been successful, even if they don't win, they posture themselves up for the next go-round. And that at least gives us a chance to recover the party. Because here's the thing where I would encourage all of us. Political parties are always under contest for who owns it and
Absolutely.
which
Oh,
direction
yeah.
they go in.
No
So the
doubt.
question is, who's the next one to come after Trump, and how do we then steer the ship?
Yeah.
And so I hope it's somebody sooner that at least gets in the game to have these discussions.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Mark, any thoughts?
That's good. Well said.
Bert, anything to add?
Not a thing.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us. Listeners, watchers, we really appreciate it. If you got questions, leave them in the comments.